Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The steel blade halted a mere inch from the jugular, a single drop of crimson beading on the skin, suspended in the breathless silence of the execution hall. Kalen didn't flinch. His golden eyes, burning with the defiance of a captured predator, remained locked on the man sitting upon the raised dais. Not the bloated emperor, but the pale, ethereal figure at his right hand. The silence was absolute, a vacuum created by the sudden, sharp sound of a porcelain cup shattering against the marble floor. "Stop." The voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a decree that could level mountains. Prince Lysander rose from his seat, his silver-white hair cascading over robes of midnight silk like a waterfall of moonlight. He descended the stairs, the sound of his footsteps echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock. The executioner, a mountain of muscle and leather, stepped back, trembling. Lysander stopped before Kalen, the legendary shadow of Vane, the assassin sent to end the imperial line, and tilted his head. The air crackled with a suffocating tension, the kind that precedes a storm capable of tearing the world apart. "He is not to be executed," Lysander declared, his gaze tracing the bruise darkening Kalen's jaw. "He is a traitor, an assassin." The emperor roared from the throne, his face purple with rage. "He killed 3 of the royal guard. And he failed to kill me," Lysander countered, his voice smooth, devoid of emotion. He reached out, his gloved fingers gripping Kalen's chin, forcing the kneeling captive to look up. "By the law of conquest, his life is mine to discard or consume. I claim him." Kalen's lips curled into a snarl, though his hands were bound in heavy iron manicuffs behind his back. "I would rather die than be a pet to a tyrant's spawn." Lysander's eyes, the color of frozen violets, narrowed slightly. "Death is easy, assassin. Living, that is the true punishment." He turned to the guards, his cape swirling dramatically. "Take him to the Onyx Tower. If a single hair on his head is harmed further, I will have your heads on spikes by sunrise." The Onyx Tower was a paradox. It was the most fortified section of the imperial palace, designed to hold high-value political hostages, yet its interiors rivaled the luxury of the emperor's own chambers. The walls were lined with black marble, and the windows, though barred with enchanted silver, offered a sweeping view of the capital city, currently drowning in the relentless winter rain. Kalen sat on the edge of the massive 4-poster bed, the velvet beneath his fingers feeling alien against his calloused skin. The manicuffs had been replaced by a singular, slender collar made of obsidian around his neck. It was humming faintly, a dampener. It cut him off from his shadow magic, leaving him feeling naked and horrifyingly human. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Kalen stiffened, his muscles coiling instinctively, prepared to fight even without his magic. Lysander entered, alone. He carried a silver basin of steaming water and a bundle of clean linen. He kicked the door shut with his heel and set the items on a low table. "You dismissed the guards," Kalen rasped, his voice rough from days of dehydration. "Arrogant. I could snap your neck before you screamed." "You could," Lysander agreed, unbuttoning his high collar to reveal the pale, vulnerable column of his throat. He didn't look at Kalen, focusing instead on wringing out a cloth. "But you won't. Because you are curious." "Curious?" Kalen scoffed, though he didn't move. "You want to know why the crown prince saved the man who put a dagger 2 inches from his heart," Lysander said, turning to face him. The cold mask he wore in the throne room had slipped, revealing an exhaustion that seemed to seep into his very bones. "Strip." Kalen blinked. "What?" "Your tunic. It's fused to your wounds. If it isn't removed and cleaned, sepsis will take you within days. I have no use for a rotting corpse." Kalen hesitated. The command was invasive, humiliating. Yet, in the assassin's eyes, he saw no lust, no sadism. Only a clinical, detached necessity. Slowly, wincing as the dried blood pulled at his skin, Kalen peeled the tattered remains of his black stealth suit from his torso. His body was a tapestry of violence, old scars intersecting with fresh lacerations from the dungeon guard's whips. Lysander approached, the warm, damp cloth in hand. Kalen flinched as the prince got within striking distance, his hand twitching toward a weapon that wasn't there. Easy, Lysander murmured. He knelt on the floor between Kalen's legs. The submission of the pose was jarring. The Prince of the Empire, kneeling before a prisoner? This will sting. The cloth touched a deep gash on Kalen's ribs, and the assassin hissed, biting his tongue to silence a groan. Lysander worked with methodical precision, cleaning the grime and blood. His touch was ghost-light, his fingers cool against Kalen's fever-hot skin. Why? Kalen asked again, the word hanging heavy in the scented air. My father intends to invade your homeland, the kingdom of Vane. In the spring, Lysander said quietly, dipping the cloth back into the water. The water turned a pale pink. He needed a martyr to rally the generals. Your public execution was to be the catalyst. By claiming you, I have bought Vane time. Kalen stared at the top of Lysander's head. You stopped the war. Postponed, Lysander corrected, glancing up. Their eyes met, violet colliding with gold. I cannot stop the avalanche, Kalen. I can only build walls to divert it. You are a traitor to your own blood, Kalen whispered, confused. The narrative he had been fed, that Prince Lysander was the ice demon, a heartless extension of the Emperor's will, was crumbling with every gentle stroke of the cloth. My blood is poisoned, Lysander said enigmatically, standing up to retrieve a jar of salve. And I am tired of spilling others to purify it. He applied the salve. It smelled of eucalyptus and mint, cooling the burning fire of the wounds instantly. As Lysander leaned in to bandage the assassin's chest, his hair brushed against Kalen's shoulder. Kalen smelled rain and crushed lilies on him. You have nowhere to go, Shadow, Lysander said softly, his hands lingering on the bandage for a fraction of a second too long. My spies tell me your guild has already disavowed you. To them, you are dead. If you return, they will kill you for failing the contract. Kalen looked away, the bitterness of that truth stinging more than the salt in his wounds. He had been a tool for his guild, just as Lysander was a tool for the Emperor. So, I am to be your prisoner forever? Not a prisoner, Lysander corrected, stepping back. A guest. Under my protection. The collar is necessary. The Emperor has mages watching the energy signatures. If they sense your shadow magic returning, they will storm this tower. And what do you get out of this? Kalen demanded, his eyes narrowing. Altruism doesn't exist in this court. Lysander paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For a moment, his silhouette looked incredibly small against the vast, dark hallway beyond. I get to look at someone who hates me for who I am, Lysander said, his voice barely audible, rather than someone who loves me for what I can give them. Weeks bled into months. The relationship between the prince and the assassin shifted like the tectonic plates of the empire, slow, grinding, but earth-shattering in its changes. Kalen healed. The physical wounds scarred over, leaving silver lines on his tense skin. He regained his strength, doing push-ups and forms in the center of the room, while Lysander sat by the window, reading reports or simply watching him. They spoke. At first, it was barbed insults and political debates. Kalen attacked the Empire's philosophy. Lysander dismantled Vane's chaotic freedom. But slowly, the debates turned into discussions. Discussions turned into shared silences. Kalen learned that Lysander was lonely. A crushing, suffocating loneliness that no amount of wealth could fill. The prince was surrounded by sycophants and vipers, unable to trust a single soul. He couldn't even trust the food on his plate, testing everything with silver needles before eating. One evening, during a violent thunderstorm that shook the tower, Kalen sat across from Lysander at a small chess table. Check, Kalen muttered, moving a black knight. Lysander stared at the board, distracted. He looked pale, even for him. He rubbed his left arm absently. You're in pain, Kalen stated. It wasn't a question. Lysander flinched. It is nothing. The weather affects the old injuries. Liar, Kalen said. He reached across the table. Lysander tried to pull away, but Kalen was faster. He grabbed the prince's wrist and pushed back the sleeve. Black veins spider-webbed up Lysander's forearm, pulsing with a sickly necrotic energy. A curse, Kalen breathed. Who did this? My mother, Lysander said, pulling his arm back and adjusting his sleeve. Before she died, she wanted to ensure I would never be strong enough to overthrow my father. It feeds on my vitality. Some days are better than others. Today is not a good day. Kalen stared at him, horror and fury warring in his chest. And you still healed me? You used your energy to dampen the collar, to protect me, while this thing eats you alive. You were worth saving, Lysander said simply, moving his white bishop. Checkmate. Kalen looked at the board. He had lost, but his mind was reeling. The complexity of the man before him was maddening. Lysander was a martyr disguised as a monster. Let me help, Kalen said, his voice low. Lysander laughed, a dry, brittle sound. You cannot kill a curse with a dagger, Kalen. No, Kalen said, standing up. He walked around the table. The obsidian collar hummed at his throat. But shadow magic consumes necrotic energy. It's the nature of the void. We eat decay. Lysander looked up, eyes wide. If you access your magic, the collar will alert the guards. Then take it off, Kalen challenged, leaning down, his hands resting on the arms of Lysander's chair. He was trapping the prince, towering over him. The power dynamic flipped in a heartbeat. If I take it off, Lysander whispered, his breath hitching as Kalen's face came inches from his. You could kill me. You could shadow step out of here and leave me to face my father's wrath alone. I could, Kalen agreed, his gaze dropping to Lysander's lips, then back to his eyes. Do you trust me, Lysander? The use of his name, without a title, stripped away the last of Lysander's defenses. The prince trembled, a minute vibration that Kalen felt through the chair. Slowly, with shaking fingers, Lysander reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, intricate key. He raised his hand. Kalen didn't move. He waited. Lysander inserted the key into the collar. Click! The obsidian band fell away. Immediately, shadows erupted from Kalen, swirling around him like a cloak of living darkness. The power was intoxicating, a rush of cold adrenaline. He took a deep breath, his eyes glowing a vibrant, supernatural gold. He could leave. He could merge with the shadows and be out of the palace in seconds. Instead, Kalen fell to his knees. He took Lysander's cursed arm in his hands. This will hurt, Kalen warned, echoing the words Lysander had said to him months ago. I know, Lysander whispered, leaning his forehead against Kalen's shoulder, surrendering completely. Kalen let the shadows flow from his fingertips into Lysander's veins. He hunted the necrotic curse, the void devouring the rot. Lysander gasped, his body arching in agony, but he didn't pull away. Kalen held him anchor steady, murmuring words in the tongue of Vain, words of comfort, of strength. When it was done, the black veins had receded significantly. Lysander slumped against Kalen, drenched in sweat, breathing hard. Why? Lysander slurred, exhaustion pulling him under. Why didn't you run? Kalen brushed a strand of damp hair from the prince's forehead. Because you are the only person in this world who sees me. The peace was fragile, shattered 3 nights later. The doors to the Onyx Tower were blown off their hinges. The royal guard swarmed in, led by General Vargas, a brute of a man who had always despised Lysander. Treason, Vargas bellowed. The censors picked up shadow magic. The prince is conspiring with the enemy. Lysander stood before Kalen, a slender sword in his hand, but he was weak from the cursed treatments. Kalen was weaponless, though the shadows coiled around him, ready to strike. Stand down, Vargas, Lysander commanded, his voice regal despite his trembling stance. This is my sanctity. The emperor has ordered the assassin's death, Vargas sneered. And if you stand in the way, my prince, we are to assume you have been compromised by sorcery and eliminate you as well. There was no negotiation. Vargas lunged, his broadsword swinging in a lethal arc meant to cleave Lysander in two. Lysander tried to parry, but the force was too great. His blade shattered. The broadsword continued its path. Shing, the sound of metal hitting something harder than steel rang out. Vargas's sword had stopped midair, caught in a tendril of solid shadow. Kalen stepped out from behind Lysander. He didn't look like a man anymore. He looked like a god of the underworld. The shadows formed armor over his skin, and in his hand, a scythe made of pure darkness materialized. You made a mistake, Kalen said, his voice echoing as if spoken by a legion. You threatened what is mine. The fight was a massacre. The guards were not prepared for a fully unleashed Shadow Master. Kalen moved like smoke, his scythe reaping through armor and bone. He was a whirlwind of death, protecting the one calm point in the center of the storm, Lysander. Within minutes, silence returned to the room. The guards lay unconscious or incapacitated. Vargas was pinned to the wall by spikes of shadow, terrified and immobilized. Kalen dissipated his weapon and turned to Lysander. The adrenaline was fading, leaving Kalen swaying. Lysander rushed to him, catching him before he fell. They collapsed together onto the rug, surrounded by the wreckage of the room. "You fool," Lysander choked out, checking Kalen for wounds. "You used too much power. The backlash." "I'm fine," Kalen wheezed, gripping Lysander's lapels. "But we can't stay here. The Emperor will send the Legion next. We have to leave. Now. Leave." Lysander looked around at the gilded cage that had been his entire life. "Go where?" "Vain," Kalen said. "The Resistance. They won't welcome me back, but they will welcome the prince who knows the Empire's secrets. We can stop your father. We can end this war." Lysander looked at Kalen. He saw the fierce determination, the loyalty that defied logic. He realized then that the power dynamic had never been master and servant. It had been two broken halves finding the only edge that matched. But before they moved, a quiet fell over them. The immediate danger had passed, leaving only the heavy realization of what this commitment meant. It was no longer a temporary alliance. It was treason. It was a life bonded together. Kalen looked down at Lysander, his golden eyes searching the prince's face. He realized he didn't want to just save Lysander. He wanted to be the shield that never broke, the shadow that never left his side. He wanted the domestic mornings they had shared, the quiet chess games, the feeling of Lysander's skin against his. He swallowed hard, the vulnerability more terrifying than the guards he had just slaughtered. "Lysander," Kalen started, his voice rough. "If we do this, there is no going back. I am not a knight. I am a killer. But he struggled with the words, the unfamiliar desire to possess and be possessed. He took a breath and finally dared to voice his secret wish. "Can I keep you?" The question hung in the air, absurd and profound. An assassin asking to keep a prince. A monster asking to keep the light. Lysander stared at him, stunned. Then, a genuine smile broke through the mask, radiant and blinding. It transformed his face, making him look younger, freer. He chuckled, a sound like wind chimes, and nodded. "Sure." Lysander leaned in, closing the distance, and pressed his forehead against Kalen's. "But be warned, Shadow. I am high maintenance. I'll manage," Kalen promised, wrapping his arms around the prince, pulling him close. The alarm bells of the palace began to ring in the distance, a chaotic symphony signaling the hunt. But in the center of the ruin, the viper and the wolf held on to each other, ready to burn the world down to build a new one from the ashes. And that is how the shadow of Vane stole the Empire's greatest treasure, not its gold, but its heart. If you enjoyed seeing Kalen destroy an entire squad to protect his prince, annihilate that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you betray your own family to save the person you love? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.